Hello, I am Grace Oedel, and I am here today with Lisa Fernandes, the Director of Communications for Food Solutions New England, which is a regional network based at the UNH Sustainability Institute. Lisa led a roundtable discussion at the 2020 NOFA Vermont Winter Conference. Some would call it a roundtable, some would call it a panel, challenging the narrative of competition and scarcity and really instead envisioning a mutually beneficial food system with people, land, and justice at the core. She's thinking a lot about new narrative creation and how we really learn to be storytellers to bring the world we're longing for into being. So can you tell me a little bit about the work that you do right now through your convening as part of the communications director?
Sure. Food Solutions New England, being a network, is made up of many groups and people from around the region. Some of them are farmers, fishermen, businesses involved in food production, processing, distribution. Some of them are agencies and nonprofits. And so that network decided that how we communicate, the narratives and frames that we use to communicate, is actually one of the things that will help us succeed in transforming our food system into something that is democratized, racially just, sustainable, and based on trust and being in connection with one another. So because of that commitment, my work emerged, which involved some pretty significant research into narratives and frames that are already at work in New England, what people think about the food system, if they even know there is such a thing as a food system. And then we also tested some of those values in different types of phrases, sentences, messages to see if they resonate with different sectors of people across New England. We did that through a bunch of different tools, quantitative and qualitative, and we've arrived at some really useful conclusions that are helping us put together things like food system transformation trainings using narrative and framing, as well as a messaging manual that will come out later in 2020 to support people in our region who really want to get better at using strong narratives and frames to change the food system we have into something that we all need.
Thank you. I know there will be a deep dive here at this conference on Monday where you'll spend a day doing that and the manual's coming out, but can you give us a sneak peek of any of those values or ideas or sort of those concepts that emerged?
Yeah, I mean, some of them are probably common sense, but we just needed to check those with real research to see if what we thought was true really was true, such as depending on the audience that we're working with, we don't necessarily want to lead with data and statistics. We may think those things are important, but there are whole sectors of audiences that we need to reach better who would probably shut down or check out or be alienated by those moments when we lead with a bombardment of data to prove our point. So that's pretty clear. It's not the best way to start a lot of our marketing and outreach with a database narrative. Although we need that data, we need that information more to buttress our key frames and key points. We also learned the important reminder that we all need all the time not to use jargony language, acronyms, insider assumptions about how the food system works if we're ever going to reach a broad audience of people in our region. And that expresses itself in a lot of different ways. And I think if we do this day in and day out, if it's our work, like it is for some of us, we can forget that because it's just the water we swim in, it's the way we talk. Another big finding among many is that centering racial justice, social justice, and equity in the food system we're trying to create is still not a widely understood concept. And our research showed us that if we're trying to reach a broad audience of people in New England, there's still a lot of confusion. What does race have to do with food? Why do I even need to think about race and racism and dismantling white supremacist cultural norms when I purchase my food? Like, why should I care? So it made us understand that we have a lot of work to do in the field of centering justice and equity in the food system that we're trying to create, in the way that we talk to people and create spaces within which they can come to some of those understandings in a way that will be effective.
Thank you for that. Yeah, one of the things that NOFA Vermont has done over the last year is add social justice to our mission statement. So our mission statement is that we promote organic practices that are economically viable, ecologically sound, and socially just. And it's really taking us a lot of internal work to understand, what does social justice mean in this context, and what are all these overlapping areas of, access, equity, inclusion, history, race, that intersect with that term, and get more adept at, parsing those different pieces of it when it's not been seen as part necessarily as centered in the organic movement historically. How do you see us going into our next 50 years as a movement really centering that? What's that going to look like?
I think that's a great question, and I think it has to do with values and really figuring out what are some of the values that people hold in common in our states and in our region. For example, we know that even if they don't practice it fully, people believe themselves to be fair. They want to see themselves as acting with fairness. So that's just one example of one value. If we understand that, then we can really work to craft relationships based on what's fair for everyone. Everyone should have fair access to the opportunities that we all have, that we all want to have, to be happy and productive people in our communities. I do think that, like any culture change work, it does take time, and it's not linear. We're not going to make reliable, identical progress year on year. It's more catabolic. There will be some years in which we make better progress than others, in some places more than others. But I think we need to continue to center both progress on the tangible, measurable, maybe quantifiable things of production types and food security and the things that we can attach numbers to, as well as progress toward the how of those achievements. So, for example, if we can produce 50% of the food that New England consumes, that's great. But if we've done so in a way that leaves a vast swath of the population behind and still hungry, without access to land and resources to feed their own families, we still will have failed. The flip side of that is we could do a fantastic job on racial and social justice and emphasize that so much that we forget to produce the food, to focus on the production goals as well. So we need both pillars to be centered in our work. It's not just what we do, it's how we do it. And those together is what constitutes a successful food system transformation.
Thank you. You have worked with MOFGA, which is the Maine Organic Farming and Gardening Association, on their Agricultural Services Committee and many other nonprofits. What role do you see organizations like MOFGA, or in our case, NOFA Vermont, playing in the future of agriculture? And what sort of responsibilities and possibilities are there for these types of organizations?
I think MOFGA and the various NOFA organizations fill a really important niche in kind of that ecosystem of New England, in that they're statewide and in some cases with NOFA regional, and they have technical expertise and well-established networks that have been in place for decades in most cases. And they have credibility in certain sectors that's already been built up. They're trusted sources of information for a lot of people. So I feel like those are assets that are already in play and could be exploited even further. I think because they already have their own networks, each organization has its own sub-network, so to speak, there's an opportunity to continue to link arms across the region and think about what kinds of things, whether it's in the social justice and racial justice category, narrative and communication skills, how we measure success, technical assistance. There's so many areas where we can continue to just amplify our own effectiveness and our learning. So there is probably a values assumption under me saying that, a belief that we're stronger connected than we are separate. And maybe not everyone would believe that assumption or subscribe to that value. But I think the statewide networks that are so well established and so credible are absolutely key to mobilizing networks and turning them into movements. And that's already happening in some places. It's not to say there aren't movements, but linking together is going to be one of the most important things we do for this pivotal decade ahead.
One of the things I really admire about you is your ability to balance this sort of short-term action-taking work and really taking concrete steps, not like just talking all the time, but turning the neighborhoods we have into the villages we need, sort of 1 yard at a time. That's work that you do. And on the other hand, really taking this extremely long view of this is going to take more than one lifetime. You spoke on that this morning. You said, these are not problems that we can solve in our lifetime. So how do you hold the tension between really wanting to respond urgently with the need to be patient and think long term?
That's a great question. I think I can only answer from my own personal practice, and everyone has their own approach to these things. For my own self, I feel like I'm really grounded these last few years in my work of understanding my ancestors and my family and where they came from and what they endured for me to be able to sit here and talk to you today. And it's miraculous, actually, that we're sitting here at this moment, given what all of our ancestors had to go through for us to be here. And I'm realizing that someday, maybe, someone will look back at each of us in this moment and wonder what piece we did or didn't do, or have compassion for what we hoped but couldn't achieve, and give each other grace around some of those things. I know that I've learned to give my own parents, grandparents, and ancestors a lot of grace for the hard stuff that came down through their lives. And some assumption that they did the best that they could. So I also feel like learning about that and spending time with that and honoring them has imbued in me a desire, a responsibility to do the best I can do. And also to give myself grace, that I am only human and I'm imperfect. And I will, whatever gifts I've been blessed with by the Creator or whoever you believe in, I'm going to use those as best I can. And sometimes I'll fail, and to have compassion for my own self in that. So it's really just a tenacity, a responsibility that's been handed to me. I had a dream where they literally handed me colored threads and I was supposed to carry them forward. It's like, well, I can't say no to that, I guess. So that's just a personal sort of context for the work that I do. And yeah, I'll make mistakes, but I'm going to keep showing up as long as I can.
You also seem to really center raising up other voices and trying to empower people to serve as a mentor. I mean, you've mentored me, but we asked you to teach a panel on Monday, and you said, I'd really like to co-teach with someone I'm mentoring. How do you see mentorship as really key in building the networks and the movements that we need? And how could other people develop some mentorship relationships in their life?
Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of different models for that, going back to, apprenticeships and different styles of coaching and support and mentorship. For me, and even with regards to the workshop we're offering here at this conference tomorrow, mentorship first and foremost means not having to take up all the space myself, and continuing to find ways to not be the center of attention and to get out of the way. If using my voice is useful to people, I will do it. But I also feel like part of my work in the world is to make myself obsolete. And I mean, how resilient would we be if we didn't continually make space for other people to step into roles that allow them to exercise their abilities and gifts and spread their own wings. So even tomorrow, it doesn't feel so much like a direct mentorship as it feels like just constantly inviting more people into the space. That also plays into my thinking about mentorship as power shifting. power to make decisions, power to allocate resources, power to access resources, money, land, whatever, and continuing to interrogate my own self to make sure that I'm doing anything I can to make sure that others can get into access and shifting of power around those things. So I just feel like the spirit of generosity, hospitality, hosting, and care for people, and then making space and getting out of the way is a big part of that.
How can people listening to this get involved with helping the New England Food Vision and see themselves as part of your work?
There's a few different ways and some new ones emerging. One would be to do the obvious, which is get on our email newsletter so that as new things arise, you'll get an alert about that. There is a New England Food Summit coming up in July, and that'll be the return of food summits, most likely on an every other year pattern where people around the region get together. So people are invited to come to that. Partaking of the Racial Equity Challenge every spring and really doing some self-work or work in your home group, your faith group, your school to learn about the history of race and racism in our food system and how we can take that apart. That's a great way to get involved. Coming this year, we will also have a sort of a pledge or a charter where people can say out loud and in print and on their website that they support building a strong regional food system around democracy, justice, sustainability, and trust. So in the past, it hasn't been clear how one could even affiliate or align with the New England Food Vision or Food Solutions New England as a network. So the other thing is our Network Leadership Institute happens every year, and we can't support absolutely everyone that applies, but we're looking for more funding to expand this amazing training program that happens every year that brings cohorts of people together so that they can more actively engage in a democratized food system in the future.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time. We're so delighted to have you with us today and for all of your work helping us tell a new kind of story.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.